Minette Norman is about to make history. We have never had a guest return on the Mindful Leader podcast until today. I am asking Minette to come back and talk to us about her brand new book. It just came out this last week, called The Boldly Inclusive Leader. There's two reasons I'm asking Minette to come back. First, she is a great guest. She's so smart. She's wonderful. She's charming. She's just everything you want in a guest. But also her book is fantastic. And I really wanted to talk to her about it. I wanted you to learn about it. I want you to buy it, but you get a preview of it in our interview today. So buckle up, get ready to hear again, Minette Norman, the Mindful Leader. Minette Norman is an author, speaker, and leadership consultant who previously spent decades leading global technical teams in the software industry. Minette has extensive experience leading internationally distributed teams and believes that when groups embrace diversity in all its forms, breakthroughs emerge and innovation accelerates. Her most recent position before starting her own consultancy was as Vice President of Engineering Practice at Autodesk, responsible for influencing more than 3,500 engineers around the globe. And if you've ever led engineers, you know that's quite a task. She focused on state-of-the-art engineering practices while nurturing a collaborative and inclusive culture. Minette is a keynote speaker on topics of inclusive leadership, psychological safety, collaborative teams, and empathy. She was named in 2017 as one of the most influential women in Bay Area business by the San Francisco Business Times and as Business Role Model of the Year in the 2018 Women in IT Silicon Valley Awards. Minette is a recognized leader with a unique perspective. She is the co-author of the Psychological Safety Playbook, Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human, which is outstanding. You should check that book out. And her second book, right here, The Boldly Inclusive Leader, was just released on August 8th. So run out and get it now. She holds degrees in drama and French from Tufts University and studied at the Sorbonne Nouvelle in Paris. Minette, you're the first guest we've ever had back on the Mindful Leader podcast. And I just love and adore you. I think you're so smart and charming and wonderful. And I'm excited to have you back.
Well, I'm thrilled to be back and truly honored to be the first repeat guest.
How has this book release been? I'm sure it's just a whirlwind and exciting and fun and all of those wonderful things.
Yes, fun and a little scary to put a book out into the world, but also incredibly exciting and fulfilling. And I will say that this book is a long time coming for me. I actually started working on it in, I believe, 2019. So now it's several years later and it's finally hit the world and I'm excited about it.
Well, the first time you were on the show, we talked about both of the books that were coming out. We talked about Psychological Safety Playbook, which is great. You and your co-author, remind me her name. I can't say it.
That's all right. Caroline Helbig.
Caroline Helbig. You two wrote a fantastic book on psychological safety. And we talked about that book was coming out. And we talked about this book coming out. And I'm just so excited for both of them. They're both really good. But I was so excited when this one was coming out. I wanted to have you back and talk about it. But let's talk a little bit about, there's two things I don't want to do. I don't want to assume that anybody heard the first interview. I also don't want to rehash everything from the first interview, but give everyone just a brief background of you for those who don't know. You're an executive in Silicon Valley. Tell everyone just a little bit about your background.
Right. My background is a little unusual to have been a VP of engineering because I studied drama and French. I planned to be an actor. And then when I got out of school and realized just how hard the acting life is, I got into the business world, and I started, well, how I started and how I ended. I started as a technical writer, and my first job in Silicon Valley was at Adobe writing the Photoshop 1.0 tutorial. I ended 30 years later as the VP of engineering practice at Autodesk. And in between, I had a lot of different roles, like about 10 years as an individual contributor and about 20 in management and leadership roles.
Yeah. And so tell us, you talk a little bit about it in the book, but tell us why you wrote this book, Boldly Inclusive Leader.
It was something that almost came over me over time, that I need to write this book because after spending 20 years in management and leadership positions, and I would say the last really 10 of those years, understanding just how complex managing human beings is. And increasingly in the world we're in now, where we really do care about cultures of engagement and inclusion and belonging, which was never talked about early in my career, but is top of mind for most organizations today. What I realized is that most leaders and managers want to do the right thing. They don't start out to be evil or to be toxic. But the problem is that they don't know how to lead. And I didn't either. So it's sort of what came over me is like 20 years of experience leading teams. I wish I had known all this stuff that I have finally learned late in my career. I wish I had learned it when I was beginning managing teams. And then when I started leading, for example, international teams, boy, I wish I had learned this. And then when we were really looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, oh, I wish I knew all of this stuff. So my impetus to write this book is, can I help get all of this out of my head, and also other people's experiences too, not just my own, and help other leaders do better sooner in their careers? And the reason to me it was so important is that people's managers make or break their experience in the workplace. I mean, we know this today. And in fact, all sorts of research shows that your manager is the most important figure in whether you're having a good or bad experience and whether you can do your best work. And so I felt like maybe if I put this book out there and enough people find it and enough people try out what I'm talking about, that we can really change workplaces for the better so that everyone has a better experience and can, fulfill their potential. Because I think people are not able to do their best work because of the circumstances in which they're managed and the cultures in which they operate.
Right. So first of all, I since we've known each other for a few years, I think two things. I think this book is, number one, right on time. I think it's a very timely book for what's happening in the world and in the corporate world. I also think you are the perfect person to write this book because of your perspective, your experience, and it's outstanding. But tell us, the word is inclusive, being an inclusive leader. But why boldly inclusive? Why did you pick the word boldly inclusive?
I'm glad you asked me that, because I was very deliberate about that word choice, as you
Right.
probably know. I feel that inclusion is thrown around a lot as a word, like we say DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and it gets thrown in there. And I think that people often tiptoe around it because, honestly, and I do talk about this in the book, people are deeply uncomfortable about how can I be an inclusive leader? How can I really embrace a diverse work and equitable workplace? I don't know what to do. So I'm going to tiptoe gently into the world of inclusion and belonging. And I'm going to be very careful, and I'm cautious, and I'm not going to take big steps. I'm going to go little by little. And what I think is happening, unfortunately, you see this, I mean, people talk about it a lot publicly, is we're not making enough progress quickly enough. And people are so fearful of doing the wrong thing, which I truly understand and empathize with.
Right.
And yet, at the same time, I feel like unless we go all in, unless we are bold, and bold means like, I'm going to do this because I know it's the right thing. I'm going to do this even if it's uncomfortable. And I'm going to do this even if I am challenging the status quo every day, because our workplaces are not evolving very quickly at all. And I'll tell you why I think we need to be bold now is that people often ask me, like, I started in Silicon Valley in 1989. So that is a long time ago. And people say, oh, it must have been really terrible back then for a woman. And we've come so far. And I'm like, not really so much in those 30 plus years.
Right,
It has
right.
changed incrementally, but not boldly, not dramatically. And we can't wait. And people, as you see, like people entering the workforce today don't have the patience maybe that my generation did. And like, we're not going to put up with this anymore.
Yeah. I was thinking, a few years ago with the George Floyd incident and all that, there were a lot of companies who were like, hey, we have to make DEI a priority, and this is important to us. And we're putting out DEI statements, and we're appointing DEI officers, and we have all this. And then it just kind of floated away. What are your thoughts on it? Or at least let me say it appears it kind of floated away. What's your perspective on that? What are you seeing?
I think you're absolutely right. And this is what's really a little alarming, I would say right now, is that yes, 2020 happened. George Floyd was murdered. In the US, everyone suddenly realized we cannot ignore diversity, equity, inclusion. We have to start talking about it. And to your point, a lot of companies put out lovely statements on their website about how we value everyone. And then there was this big rush to hire DEI professionals. And a lot of people were hired. And yet, this is this is unfortunately what happened is a lot of people saw that, or companies saw this as like, we're going to invest in it now. And then it fades a little to the background and people think that other business priorities are more important.
Right.
And it's not treated as an imperative the way financial performance or innovation is. And yet I would say that unless you create inclusive cultures, you're not going to get any of that great performance or innovation that you're looking for. And there's lots of data to back that up. And what I'm seeing, especially this past year, where there have been so many layoffs in so many, especially in the tech industry where I'm most familiar, but everywhere, is who are the first people getting let go a lot of the time? It's the DEI people that were hired in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. And
Right.
people are now saying, well, let's back down on this and go more cautiously, and we can't afford it or whatever. And I would argue you can't afford not to. And we must continue the investment, and we must continue to measure progress. And we do have to be bold about it. We can't just like do a little bit here and then dial back, and we're not going to make progress that way.
Right. Right. And that is why I say I think this book is right on time, because it's coming back and saying, hey, we can't forget all of that stuff. We have to keep the momentum going. And that's why I think it's so important. So unfortunately, as you mentioned in the book, towards the beginning of the book, there's not 3 easy steps to being an inclusive leader. So you have 10 great chapters, which don't equal 10 easy steps either. So it's just a lot of it's such a great book. The 10 chapters are, in my opinion, just 10 topics of it's like it comes across to me like you just having a conversation. You're trying to put them in good categories of like, look, let's just talk about these things, and you're trying to categorize them as best you can. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't come across like I'm probably not wording that well. That almost sounds like it's disorganized. It's not disorganized, but I mean to say that it doesn't come across like these are 10 easy steps. It comes across like I'm trying to give you good, solid information to make inclusion happen. And it's very powerful, is what the book is. So I have notes for all 10 chapters. I don't think we're going to have time to talk about all 10 chapters, but I have notes for all 10. So let's see where we get. And there are some things I definitely want to talk to you about, even if we don't get to all 10. So are you ready for my barrage of questions?
I am ready.
Okay, well, let's start with chapter 1, because it's talking about how leaders set the tone, which obviously is important. Any initiative you try to get involved in, either when people started out or when they complain about where they can't get to, they always say, well, the tone starts at the top. And it's obviously true in inclusion and leadership. And you talk about self-awareness with leadership and inclusion. Talk about this tone setting and self-awareness.
Yeah, I certainly believe that leaders do set the tone, and they are often unconscious of the tone that they are setting, which is why I talk about self-awareness. And whenever I do workshops or I work with I usually work with leadership teams. And when I work with them, I say we have to start with ourselves. And I include myself in that. Like, we have to start with, how are we communicating? How are we rewarding others? Because this is when we're setting the tones, often unconsciously, right? Let's just say we are holding a staff meeting and we pay attention to some people in the room more carefully than others. And that happens all the time, right? And we do it inadvertently. Like, I'm really going to listen to you, David, because I think you're, really smart guy. And then there's someone else at the table and I kind of dismiss what they say. You have just signaled to the whole room that you favor David and you are not favoring this other person. They are feeling left out. The whole room has just understood David's more important than this other person. So that's an example of where we inadvertently can really set a negative tone of disparity, of like, who's on the insiders club and who's on the outside. And I talk about that in the book because I think it's really important that we as leaders try to dismantle the in groups and the out groups as much as possible. The people in the in groups are getting the attention, they're getting the great assignments, they're getting in front of the executive staff, they have high visibility. And the people who are on the outside are like, they're invisible, they feel excluded, they don't feel important. And they withdraw. And when you withdraw, you don't fully participate. So leaders really need to be aware of what they're tolerating, what they're rewarding, and how they're communicating. Are they truly open to other perspectives? So that's, in a nutshell, what I'm talking about there.
Yeah. And I love that perspective because so much when we talk about inclusion, people think it has everything to do about race.
Yes.
And it goes so far beyond that. It goes to literally including everyone for everything, for all types of concepts. Inclusion is including everyone. And I have one of my favorite quotes in the book. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but it goes more to what you're talking about. But inclusion is literally including everyone. And that's a difficult thing to do.
It is. And to your point, it's true. And I see this with clients a lot, is that, and of course, we understand why we talk so much about race in this country, because there is such an issue with race and disparities and opportunities and privilege. And I acknowledge all of that. And because it's not a but, and there are infinite ways human beings are different from one another, and race is one of them, right? And gender is one, and the list is long. And I think that we forget that there are many ways people feel, I'll use the word other, right? They don't feel like they fit into the dominant group. And race and gender and neurodiversity and country of origin and sexual orientation, all of these things, the list is so long. But it also can be personality and ways of thinking and, things that we don't think of as aspects of diversity sometimes. So yes, I'm talking about inclusion broadly.
Right. You, on page 21 of the book, you're talking about a speaking coach, Nan Crawford, and she's talking about giving speeches and delivering keynotes. And she says there's 3 things to consider in delivering a speech, and she's talking about the context. And one of those things in delivering a speech in context is, how do I want people to feel? And I highlighted that because it's so important in giving speeches. I do a lot of public speaking, as you do as well. And that is something I think about all the time, not just in speeches, but in events and all those things. But it's so important as a leader to think of all the time, how do I want people to feel? Talk about that.
I pulled that out because it really resonated with me when Nan told me that when I was working on speeches. I realized I can extrapolate this to any situation as a leader. I can be walking down the hallway, right? I can be walking down the hallway. Maybe I'm in a hurry. I'm on my way to my next meeting and I cross paths with someone. If I do not make eye contact and just brush past them, and this has happened to me, I know how it feels. You feel like you're invisible. You feel like you don't matter. How hard is it to say, hey there, you don't even stop. You just say, hey, how you doing? And you keep going, but you make eye contact and you see that person and they feel valued. that to me is, how do you want someone to feel? I want them to feel that I saw you, I value you, I respect you. And I think leaders should feel that, should come into every encounter with that idea, like, I'm just going to have a one-on-one with someone. How do I want them to feel? Well, it may differ. It may not be always the same, right? It may be that I have some tough feedback that I have to give so-and-so this week. I want them to feel open-minded. I want them to feel that they can hear this, and I want them to feel that this is serious. Okay, so how am I going to do that? And so we can always set our intention with how we want people to feel. But if we are unconscious of that, then we're probably going to make people feel not the way we want them to in many situations.
Right. I think this concept of how I want people to feel and those interactions, you might call them minimal interactions, are one of the most overlooked secrets to great leadership. Leaders are busy, they're in meetings, they're walking in between meetings, they're checking their email on their phone in the halls, and they're trying to maximize their time, but they're really missing the key moments of leadership, just interacting with people. They're missing those golden moments when they don't realize how they're making everybody feel. They're making people feel unimportant and unvalued. They're missing those golden opportunities.
That is so, so true. And it's one of the things I think I did instinctively, that I'm a people person, which helped me actually be a better leader, because I love human interaction. And I think most people who lead teams need to at least care about humans, right? Otherwise, I think that's a bit of a prerequisite. But I do know that when I left my job at Autodesk after 20 years, I received, as you do, a whole bunch of emails from people. And a couple of them really struck me, because what some people said, and I included a couple examples in the book, just because of what you're pointing out, things that I thought of as like, I don't even remember doing that, had a huge impact on someone. Someone said, we only saw each other occasionally over the years, and yet the fact that you remember my name and you always asked about how my work was going, it made me feel so seen, and it made me feel cared about. Right. And like that to me was just the minimum, doing the minimum, interacting, remembering someone's name, knowing how to pronounce someone's name. These little things are critical. And you hear the opposite of like, this person has mispronounced my name for years. They clearly do not care about me.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Like take the time to learn to pronounce. And if you don't know how to do it, ask. Right.
Right. Right. Okay. I may circle back to some of these other chapters if we have time, but I want to be sure and talk about chapter 4. Some of these chapters, like the titles, have a title where I can extract like one or two words and really hit the essence of the title. But I love your title of chapter 4, because I feel like I can't leave anything out of the title. It's Communication from the Heart, Building Trust by Being Human. Like, I was thinking, like, how can I shorten that? Like, it's about communication. No, because it's about communication from the heart, but it's also about trust. Well, but it's about building trust, but it's about being human. Every part of that title is so important. Talk about being human as a leader for a second. Why is that so important? And what does that mean to be human as a leader?
One of the things that is really important, I believe, for leaders is to, and we even talk about this in the other book that I co-wrote, is to take off this facade, like remove the facade that I have to be perfect if I'm a leader, and that I have no vulnerabilities and I never get anything wrong. And instead, just to show up as someone who is human like anyone else, who has strengths and weaknesses, who knows things, but also has things to learn, and who is open to other perspectives, knowing that I see the world through my lenses, and that's just one way of seeing it. And I'm really curious to learn from others. And I think that I believe, like when I have been with leaders who are willing to say, I don't know, or who are willing to say, you know what, I screwed up, and I really need to fix what I did wrong, or I need to change my decision because I got new information. I respect those leaders.
Mhm.
And I think people see like, oh, wow, look, they're being honest. They're being genuine. They're talking from the heart. They're not just like reading a script that is perfect and polished and their comms person wrote it for them. This is actually the real person speaking right now. And they're expressing that they are imperfect and that they have emotions, right? And I think that that's part of it also that I talk about in the book, is that we sort of have this, I mean, I think these are outdated modes of leadership, but the traditional model of leadership is you leave your emotions at the door, you come in and you show this facade of like, I'm not going to let anything show here. I'm just going to be, I've got this mask on basically.
Right.
And I think what I would advocate is that we need to actually get better in touch with our emotions as leaders, because if we don't, and this from your mindfulness work, that our emotions are going to get the better of us because they're there. We can't turn them off. Emotions are what make us human. That's part of what I mean about being human. We have emotions. So why don't we get more in touch with them, understand them better, and then we can actually decide how we want to respond. We don't have to, like, we're angry, we don't have to respond in anger, but we have to acknowledge, I'm getting angry right now. How do I want this person to feel on the other side of me? Do I want to lash out with them? Probably not. Maybe I want to, ask a question or such and such. So that's what I mean. It's like acknowledging our emotions, acknowledging our imperfections, and not, I mean, there's also a fine line, I have to admit, that we don't want to be so vulnerable that we're spilling our guts every day at work, right? That's just going to make people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So hitting the balance of like, I am not perfect, but I'm also not a mess. Like, where is that line?
Right. Yeah, you have a section where you talk about balancing confidence, openness, and vulnerability. Talk a little bit about that, because you want your leader to have some confidence. So talk about that balance of those.
Yeah. So and that's the point. Like, you don't want to come across as like, I know nothing, tell me everything. Then people are just going to be like, well, why the heck are you in a leadership position, right? So definitely come in with what I know. And then also, where do I have some questions maybe? Like, I think that's actually, this shows confidence to me. I'm going to come in with a point of view. I've done my homework. I've done my research. I'm going to get up in front of you perhaps and say, this is where I think we need to go. This is the plan. And then here's where the vulnerability is. I've worked with my leadership team, and we're a group of 10, let us say, and there may be something that we have overlooked. Now, that's a pretty honest and vulnerable thing to say, right? You can't, instead of getting up there and saying, we've checked all the boxes, we've done our research, and we've got this all wrapped up. Instead, to say, we would love input, and maybe we need to time box this input. Maybe we're going to say, like, for the next week, we would love feedback on this plan, and we're going to digest it. And then we're going to come back. If there are any tweaks we're going to make them publicly, and we're going to tell you. And if we've got it, we've got it. But we are open to suggestions, feedback, what have we missed, that kind of thing. That's the balancing the confidence that we've done our homework, that we know a certain amount, and that we may have missed something. And we want to hear it from you. And you will not be punished if you give us that feedback.
Right. Minette, I'm thinking as we're talking that you and I know that this type of leader, the type of leader you're talking about, is where leadership is going. There are a lot of leaders who are already there. They buy into this philosophy. There are some leaders who are not there. There are some leaders who are never going to be there, right? But the shift is definitely going towards this type of leadership model. What does somebody do if they're listening and they say, yeah, I'm trying to be this kind of leader, but I'm in a culture where maybe the people above me are not there yet. And maybe it's a cutthroat kind of culture. I'm thinking of an organization that I know of where the CEO is famous for just kind of going through executive leadership. Like that CEO is known for, like, you're basically going to do it my way, and you have to come in with that bold kind of confidence and like come in, and chop heads, and you're going to do it that way, or you're not going to survive in this organization. But that person may be in the organization, they're like, they want to be this type of leader, but if they are, they're not going to survive in that organization. What would you tell that person?
That's a really tough one, because I think the question comes down to, can you still have integrity in your own work? Can you feel good about your work while working for a leader who, doesn't value the same things that you do? In some cases, and so this is why I don't think it's a clear yes, no kind of situation.
Mhm.
I think there's situations where you may be given enough autonomy that you can still have a positive impact on your own organization and the people around you. And you maybe what you can do is you can have a great influence on an organization that you are in charge of. So where you do have control and you do have influence, and maybe you're going to have the people under you are going to have a great experience. You, however, may not be having that great experience if you're reporting to this boss or manager or executive who doesn't value the same things. And so then it becomes a personal question. And can you operate in these circumstances and feel good enough to get up and come to work every day? Or is it eating away at your soul? Is it making you feel like, I'm slimy and I'm having to live this double life, in which case you really do have to question, is this the right place for you? And I get that, of course, it's not always easy to change jobs. And, given circumstances, sometimes you just have to stay in a place for a set period of time for whatever reason. And then I would say, do what keep what you can control, have as positive an influence as you can. Maybe you can even have some kind of an influence on that person, but probably not if they're not open-minded. And so then you do need to make those decisions. And unfortunately, this is a question that comes up time and time again, because people are not always reporting to people who are open-minded about what leadership looks like. And that's a hard place to be, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great answer. The last part of that chapter 4, communication from the heart, building trust by being human. Talk a little bit about trust and why that's so important.
Yeah, well, trust is so fundamental as we interact in work or in life, right? And some aspects of trust are just like, if I tell you something in confidence, you're going to keep it in confidence, like those kind of basic tenets of trust. But there's also this feeling of like, I have your back, I care about your well-being, I'm not going to do anything to undermine you. And I think what's hard about trust is that sometimes we're cautious of extending trust to others. Like, I'm going to be really careful because this person hasn't yet proven to me that they're trustworthy. And one of my beliefs, take it or leave it, is that we almost have to just take a leap of faith and be the first ones to trust.
Right. I agree.
And extend trust. And then often trust comes back to us when we extend it. And I tell a story about that in the book of a coworker of mine who was relatively new, and she was having a really hard time. And she just came to me and like, I need help. Like, this just happened. And I felt like she extended me trust, even if I hadn't demonstrated yet that I was trustworthy. But of course, then there was a bond between us of mutual trust. I trusted her, she trusted me back. So I think some of it is that leap of faith of like, I'm going to trust until you do anything to prove that you're not trustworthy. And it's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm a believer in extending trust until you can't. So you
Until
just
you
have to
can.
keep doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chapter 5 is about empathy and compassion. And I love that you define those terms and you give some more fuller definitions. But on page 73, you say, I see empathy and compassion as complementary traits in inclusive leadership. Empathy helps you understand other people's experiences and feelings, and compassion makes you eager to take action to alleviate other people's pain and suffering. And I think that's so important for people to understand, is that because we talk about compassionate leadership, and empathy and compassion are different things. And compassion is actually that desire to take action to alleviate the suffering. Talk a little bit about that empathy and compassion.
I do believe that empathy, I'll start with empathy. I think that empathy is required to be an inclusive leader because empathy gets us to understand other people's perspectives, experiences, emotions. And when we work with diverse teams, we have not experienced what other people have experienced. We may never, I can never have the experience of being a Black woman or a Latino man in the workplace. I just can't have that experience. What I can do with empathy is to try to understand What is that like? What is your day-to-day life at work like? What are you dealing with that I'm not? And then that's eye-opening, right? That because there's the myth of empathy means walking in someone else's shoes. And we actually can never do that because
Right.
we have our own lives and bodies and experiences. So we try our best through empathy, and we have to practice empathy like anything else. It doesn't necessarily come easily to all of us. And even if we're naturally empathetic, when you deal with someone who's very different from you, and think about, for example, I'll just take politics as an example. It can be really hard to be empathetic about someone who disagrees with you politically.
Right.
And that's where I see a lot of like, we do the us and them, like, okay, I'm this and you're that, right? And I won't even name parties, but let's just say that.
Yeah.
And we demonize the other, right? And
Right.
instead, what I advocate is if you are in a position of leadership, you are going to have people you don't necessarily like or see eye to eye with. And yet it is still your duty to try to understand what they're experiencing and try to care about them, whether you see eye to eye or not. So that's the empathy piece. And I give examples of how to help work on empathy. And then the compassion piece, and this is where I think it's so important for leaders, is that people are suffering at work. I mean, we have data to that. People are having mental health crises. They are not having a good time at work. As a leader, what we want to do is try to alleviate the suffering at work and minimize the pain. And it's not just, I mean, even if you're not altruistic, I mean, it feels like the right thing to do anyway, but even if that's not what motivates you, it's going to be better for performance. It's going to be better for employee engagement and retention. It's going to be better for all the business things that you care about. So we need to alleviate the suffering as much as possible of the people in our teams. And first of all, we need to understand their experiences. And that's how the empathy and compassion pieces for me in inclusive leadership tie together.
Yeah, I was with a group last week, and I wasn't leading this group, but I was listening in on these leaders' conversations, and the conversation turned so quickly to everybody just has to suck it up. Everybody just has to, pull themselves up by the bootstraps and get their act together and suck it up. And I was just like, where is the understanding and compassion? And listen, I understand grit, right?
Yes.
I understand grit. None of us have accomplished anything without some level of grit in our lives. But the hardness of that group was I was just sitting there cringing. I was like, there's no compassion, there's no empathy, there's no nothing. It was heartbreaking. It really was.
Yeah, and that's so sad to see, because then obviously no positive change is going to happen if you say just suck it up, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really hard. You talk in this chapter. My favorite sentence in the book, and it's such a simple sentence. I already closed it. I think I can find it real fast. To me, it's just like the most simple thing. But you say the opposite of inclusion is exclusion. And that's a lonely feeling. And then you tell the story, and I'd like for you to tell the story of you were at a dinner with some executives, and you were walking along with one executive and another. Tell that story and what that means, because I think that's so powerful. And I think all of us have experienced something similar to this, and it illustrates what you're talking about with exclusion.
It goes back to your point about one of these seemingly insignificant or tiny incidents that has a profound impact on someone. So my story that I was telling was, I was on an executive team and we were having an offsite, and we were going to a dinner after the day of meetings. And I was walking down the hallway towards the restaurant with one of my colleagues, and it was funny because it actually had to do also with size. It was like he's this really tall guy and I'm like 5'3". So I'm walking down the hall with this guy, and he's very friendly. He's very jocular, and we're just chatting. And then another one of our colleagues, another 6'3" guy, comes up alongside him, and he greeted the guy that I was with. And he did not acknowledge my existence. And the two of them, with their much longer legs, just walked off ahead of me down the hall. And I was left behind feeling like I am this big, right? I'm not even 5'3", I'm like an inch tall, and I am invisible. and I don't matter, and I am not one of the inside club. And I mean, it's pretty heartbreaking. And I know that sounds like such a minor incident, but I really like, my heart was broken in some ways.
And what I'm picturing in this is, in reality, your peers on this executive team,
Exactly.
but in reality, you were not treated as a peer.
Right. It was like, there's those guys, and then there's little me. And like, yes, we were all peers. We all had the same titles. We were all at the same leadership team. And it felt so hurtful. It really, really did.
And that's the exclusion. And it doesn't matter if it's in high school
No.
and someone does that. It doesn't matter if it's at work and you're not on the executive team, you're just in your peer group at work, or even on an executive team, this exclusion happens. But as leaders, we have an obligation to eliminate the exclusion. And it goes back to chapter 1 of the self-awareness.
Exactly. Exactly. And if I mean, that person had no idea he had done that. He was
Right.
just coming up to talk to his buddy, and they walked ahead. And like, we had no idea he had hurt my feelings. He had excluded me. But that's the self-awareness. Is like, if you come up to two people, acknowledge both people. Even if
Right.
maybe you do it, maybe you need to have a discussion with the one guy about something. Fine.
Right.
But acknowledge, hey, Minette, good to see you. I'll talk to you later. Right. And then at least I would have felt like, all right, I'm not invisible. Right.
Yeah. What the story reminded me of as soon as I read it was, I was standing with a team once of my team that I was managing, and an executive that I was on an executive team with came walking up and said, "Hi, David," because they felt like they were greeting their peer. And then they walked off, and everyone on my team said, "What are we, chopped liver?"
Chopped liver.
Because they just like, well, why did they say hi to you and not to all of us, who that person knew well, right? They knew everybody on my team, but they greeted me and not them. And that act just, made them feel horrible and reduced that leader in their eyes. It made them feel like, well, they're not following that leader into battle, right?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
so that's what it does, is it not only does it hurt the people, like it hurts their feelings, but it also hurts that person's leadership cachet.
That's
Like
right.
it hurts their ability to lead.
No, for sure. And I tell a story about my own missteps in
Right.
trying to.
We've all done it. We've all
done it. And like mine was one example that was like really eye-opening for me. As I was talking about, I led very international teams, and I was having an offsite, and I thought I was being really inclusive. We were having, just a social hour. And I thought, oh, this will be great. Everyone can get together and get to know each other. And after the fact, one of my team members who was from China said to me, that was really hard for me. I didn't feel I could participate because everyone was talking about American TV and sports and movies. And I just have no frame of reference for this. I don't know. So I couldn't participate. And then I felt terrible, right? That was
Right.
one of those moments where I was like, oh, you think you're inclusive, Minette? Look what you just did, right? So we all do it. But then we can do, if we know about it, we can do better.
Right. Right. Chapter 8. I love this chapter. It's about inclusive meetings. And you talk about how meetings reveal your culture. Talk about how that's so, and how we can have more inclusive meetings.
No, yeah, it's one of my favorite topics. So what happens
Yeah.
when I say that meetings reveal your culture, what I think happens really often, I've seen it and I've also read about it, is that you go into a meeting and let's say your team is 8 people. 2 people dominate most of the meeting conversation, and the remaining 6 kind of sit back and are fairly quiet. And the thing is that those other 6 people have lots of ideas and have lots of things to say, but either they can't get a word in edgewise because the 2 people are so vocal, or when they do speak, they get interrupted. And when you get interrupted, you also feel like you're not important, or people just ignore them. So like I have actually been that person where I say something in a meeting and then people just move on to another topic. And I'm thinking, was that out loud, or did I just say that in my head? Right. Because
Right.
people do not pay attention to everyone in the same way. And so, what I advocate is really being very deliberate about how you run meetings. And some of the suggestions are like, maybe you want to try turn taking, where you actually go around the virtual table and say, like, everyone is going to speak once before anyone speaks twice. And we're going to monitor the airtime. Like, these are all things we can do. And I'm not saying you have to do it in every meeting, but if you want to set the culture on a better course, then you do have to be deliberate. And I think, having someone facilitate meetings is a great practice, because then you have someone neutral who can say, like, okay, David, you've done a lot, thank you for your contributions, but let's hear from somebody else. Right.
Right.
And I also think one of the things that I saw so much is the peer pressure in meetings to agree, whether to agree with the leader or to agree with the dominant personalities.
Right.
And actually, you're missing out on, like, no one feels they can dissent, or no one feels they can offer an alternate point of view. So I actually suggest mining for dissent in meetings, and like saying, who's got a different perspective? We want to hear it, and inviting that. I think that's really important, because if we aren't deliberate about it, what happens is, and I talked about this a lot because I lived this so much, the meeting after the meeting, right? Like, you have the meeting and everyone seems to agree, and you walk out, and then it's like, or afterwards on Slack, can you believe that? That was ridiculous. We don't really agree with it. But you want to have those discussions in the meeting. And so setting up your meetings where that's possible.
Yeah, that chapter is loaded with lots of great content. And I've done meeting facilitation. I've run lots of meetings, and that was one of my favorite chapters. There's so much great information in that chapter. I highly recommend that. Chapter 9 talks about being a mentor, a sponsor, or ally. Talk about what each of those mean. What's the difference in those, and why are each of those important?
Well, I think the subtitle of that chapter is something like using your power to help others. And I do feel right. I do feel that leaders, like, one of the things that we have, especially as we progress through the ranks, is we have privilege and we have platforms. And I believe that we then have a responsibility to help bring up others behind us and the next level of leadership. And so mentorship, mentoring is really just being a sounding board for someone in a private and confidential setting where they can ask for advice, and you can give advice as someone generally who's more senior, but not always. There's a lot of reverse mentoring now, which I think is really great, where younger, more junior people in the workplace are mentoring the senior people who are like, what do you all care about? Because I have no clue. So mentoring can go both ways. And I think mentoring is really important. It's a generous act of sharing what you know and how you can help someone. Where it progresses to sponsorship is that mentoring is done in private, basically in a one-on-one setting. Sponsorship, you are out there taking action to advocate for this person. So maybe you're getting them into a job interview. Maybe you're getting them invited to speak at a conference. Maybe you're getting them a stretch assignment, but you're talking publicly about the person. Then you are their sponsor. And sometimes for me, it often came after I mentored someone for a while. Then I felt like, oh, I know this person really well. I'm going to go advocate for them to take on a new role, right? And I've done that. Right. And sponsorship, there's a lot of, if you read about mentoring and sponsorship, especially in the DEI world, there's the sense that women and underrepresented minorities are over-mentored and under-sponsored. Like, we spend a lot of time like, let's get women to, know how to communicate more powerfully. But who's getting the sponsorship? It's the men, the white men. So what we need to do is sponsor as much as we mentor. And then allyship is just being an upstanding citizen for anyone else. And so, if you see someone getting interrupted in a meeting, you say, hold on a second, they didn't get to finish their thought. That's being an ally. It's calling out, offensive languages or acts of exclusion, and not just being silent about them, but being outspoken and standing up. I think it's like allyship can often be called being an upstander as opposed to a bystander, right? Like, I'm not going to let those indignities go and those aggressions and microaggressions. I'm going to call them out when I see them.
That's so good. And I can't remember if that was in this chapter or somewhere else in the book, but you make a strong point in the book about being the kind of leader who doesn't just let that kind of stuff go. You have to be the kind of leader who stands up for what's right even in the face of all of that. You have to point all of those types of, microaggressions or outright aggressions, whatever they are, out.
Exactly.
You have to stand up against that.
Exactly. And that's I think I even talk about that early in about setting the tone. Part of the way
Yes,
you set the tone is what you tolerate, right?
right,
So if
right,
you tolerate those things, you're basically saying this is okay, right?
right,
As opposed to calling it out and saying, we're not going to behave that way in my team.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love that. Minette, we are out of time, but we have barely scratched the surface of all of the outstanding things in this book. The book is The Boldly Inclusive Leader by Minette Norman. I highly recommend it. Listen, if you go out and get a copy, yours will not be autographed like mine is, but it will be amazing nonetheless. They can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all of those things. They can also, I assume, go to your website and order a copy.
They can just get it from any of the retailers, and it should be in bricks and mortar stores too. It's not just available online. So if your local independent bookstore doesn't have it, ask them to get it.
Great. And you can also connect with Minette at MinetteNorman.com, and you can connect with her on LinkedIn. And she is a fantastic speaker. She does keynotes and workshops and all of those things. And I highly recommend her. She can come to your organization and speak for you, and you will not be disappointed. She'll do a fantastic job. Anything else we need to share with them?
That's it. You covered it, David. I'm so grateful to you for inviting me back and for the rich conversation as always.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, David.
I know that you enjoyed that interview with Minette Norman as much as I did. She is so great. Be sure and check out her website, MinetteNorman.com, and get the book, The Boldly Inclusive Leader. You will not be disappointed. It is such a great book, not just on inclusion, but on leadership in general, how to be just a wonderful leader from a great example and a great teacher, trainer, speaker, Minette Norman. I will do a meditation in just a moment. Before we do, I'd like to ask you to do us a favor. If you enjoy what you're hearing on the Mindful Leader podcast, if you will go out wherever you listen to the Mindful Leader and rate and review the podcast for us. If you give it a rating, we like the highest rating if possible. Go out and give us the rating for us, and then make a comment. That helps people know what it is you enjoy about the Mindful Leader podcast. We deeply appreciate your ratings and reviews. Then be sure to go out to pendulumcoaching.com. That is our website. You can find more information about us there. You can sign up for our weekly email newsletter. We get a lot of great comments each week from that newsletter. You can also learn more about me at the website, and you can invite me to come speak for your event or your organization. We do keynote talks, we do workshops, we can consult with your organization. We do all kinds of great things. So be sure to get in touch with us any way we can work with you. Be sure to tell your friends about the Mindful Leader podcast and spread the word about the fun stuff we're doing here. Let's take a moment and get in the mindset to do a meditation. As always, we say if you are driving, please be careful. Don't close your eyes. Be careful about how relaxed you get. But let's just get in a position for your meditation. You can be in any position you like. If you're sitting in a chair, maybe place your feet on the ground, if that's how you like to do that. Maybe place your hands in your laps, place your back against the back of the chair. If you're laying down, that's fine. I invite you, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes. I like to take a few breaths just to feel relaxed, maybe calm the central nervous system. Inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. And inhale. And exhale. You can just continue breathing normally. We're not trying to get ourselves into any particular state. If you hear noises that are bothering you, just let them fall aside. Just focus on my voice and on the guided meditation I'll be taking you through on a particular thought. One of the things we discussed with Minette while talking about her book was the idea of how do I want people to feel. This is important in being an inclusive leader, but it's important for all of us as we go through life and thinking about how we want the people around us to feel. Minette mentioned that there are all kinds of people that we encounter. People of different races, genders, personalities, body types. We're different and diverse in a myriad of ways. And to be inclusive means that we include others. So think about how you feel yourself when people aren't inclusive of you for various reasons. Think for a moment about how you feel when you aren't included. Now think about how you want others to feel. What are the feelings that you want them to experience from you? Now think about a typical day, maybe some of the encounters that you have throughout your day, maybe when you start your morning at home, and then depending on what you do throughout the day, maybe getting on Zoom meetings or going to the office or maybe going to various places that you frequent, starting in the morning and then through the afternoon, even into the evening, then coming home at the end of the day. Think of those encounters that you experience throughout the day and think, how do you make people feel during those encounters? Now think about some of the difficult conversations or tough times. Minette mentioned maybe having to give tough feedback. Think of some of those difficult times that you have to have encounters with people. How do you want people to feel even in those difficult times? Now, as you think about how you want people to feel, if you had to summarize in one word or maybe two words how you want people to feel, what would that word or a couple words be? How would you summarize how you want people to feel from you? Consider writing that word somewhere where it's visible that you can see it, so you remember that that is how you are trying to make the people around you feel. Let's inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. One more time. Inhale and exhale. You can open your eyes. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you joining us for this interview with Minette Norman. Remember to check out her book, The Boldly Inclusive Leader. I know you'll enjoy it. Check her out at MinetteNorman.com. Join us at PendulumCoaching.com. Tell your friends about us, and we will see you next time on The Mindful Leader.